Are people in US military bands trained as soldiers? Sort of, in the sense that they go through basic training. But in the Air Force, for example, most of us would be nearly totally useless in actual combat regardless of what our job is. Only infantry spends any reasonable amount of time training as infantry, only snipers really train as snipers, etc. For example, I am medical. I know how to take a gun apart and put it back together and hit a target on the range with some minimal degree of consistency. I have done some basic drills on how to work as a fire team, but God help us if anything substantial is ever riding on my skill in combat. We're fucked. Go to the military band if you want to meet someone who can kill a man 5 different ways, armed only with a bassoon. Everyone that is in a US military band had to attend basic training just like everyone else, except for the president's own Marine band. They have their own training thing. Soldier is the term applied to people in the Army. Everyone who joins the Army attends basic combat training where they learn the very basics of combat among other things. They are, if you consider basic training sufficient. That's generally all they do before taking positions as musicians. I studied music in college and a few friends went into the service bands. They enjoyed it with one exception: they had to put on their uniforms to rehearse. Mind, they were in civies most of the time. So they show up at the hall, change into uniforms, rehearse, then change back to civies. I was once approached by a fairly high-ranked NCO from the US Army Band, and he asked me if I wanted to join. I had classical training on trumpet after all. I decided to keep my job in communications at the time, though. A tuba and bazooka pretty much work the same anyway. I was in the Army Band for 12 years. Yes, we are all trained as soldiers. We have to do basic training just like everyone else, an annual rifle qualification and skills testing. Bands that are part of a division do regular field training and deploy with the division. The extent that they are capable ready for combat largely depends on the branch, and if they are going in as enlisted or as officers. If you're calling them soldiers, that's an Army-specific term, but I assume you mean all branches. Marines probably have the best reputation for ensuring every MOS is able to fight if needed. Their training is very combat-focused regardless of what the MOS is, and regardless of if they are enlisted officers. Contrast that with if you're a JAG officer lawyer in the Air Force, you might have had a grand total of an hour's worth of training on an M17 pistol during OTS, and no training at all with rifles the last time I checked. This is exactly what Air Force JAGs got. But anyone going in as enlisted is going to get a fair amount of combat weapons training in every branch during basic training. Not only are they trained, they are the elite fighting force when it comes to unconventional warfare special operations. Rumor has it, Bin Laden was assassinated after having his face melted by a guitarist shredding the Freebird solo during the breach into his compound. They will have gone to basic training, yes. They will march, shoot a rifle, throw a grenade, get tear gassed, all that shit. After that, though, probably not so much as compared to other military folks. Yup. And sometimes they are still sent over as a solider. There's stories of Army Band members being sent as convoy gunners during the initial Iraq invasion. I used to know a corpsman that played for the Navy rugby team. Yes, he was a great corpsman. I'm sure Band is the same way. All Marines and US Army soldiers are soldiers first, meaning they go through extensive basic combat training. Sailors and airmen will go to basic training schools that teach them military drill and discipline, but they are pretty light on basic infantry tactics and marksmanship. They definitely still learn it, just not to the depth that soldiers and Marines are expected to. Absolutely. They all went to BCT, so yeah, they still have to train and do qualifications. While I was deployed for OIF, there was a story in my unit that the convoys we kept using to shuttle around from FOBs to COPs and back were all manned with marching band gunners, but I never bothered to validate the statement. Allegedly, their unit got deployed just like everyone else in their brigade division, and since they had no reason to stay back as a garrison trooper stateside, they just tossed them in anywhere that needed bodies. Since we use support convoys for travel, and not the ones that actually went on patrol looking for trouble, it made sense that anyone behind the gun would do about the same. We all get the same basic training regardless of any job you're enlisting to do, so it was certainly enough to know how to operate the bare minimum of rifleman tasks and combat drills. Everyone goes through basic, then there's the secondary training. They do basic training, then their duty station for advanced training in military decorum. Members of the US Army Band have gone through basic training and are considered soldiers. Members of bands from other branches still go through basic, but they would be referred to by their branch's term for service members instead of soldiers.